Hello everyone, my name is Alex. I'm a 2000 rated over-the-board chess player, and in this series we're going from 1000 to 2000 elo in chess.com rapid games, where I'll be explaining my thought process as best as I possibly can for your education and entertainment. And in today's video we have a Caro Kann defense, and hopefully I will show you how to play the Caro Kann like a 2000 rated player. So here we shouldn't really push, because if we do push, the pawn gets pretty difficult to defend. It's an overextension of the center, really. So you can treat it like a classical Caro Kann, being pawn d4, take. And we'll play, we'll play knight to f6 and go for a Tartakower. Now the idea is that we're going to try to claim this knight on f6, sorry, not f6, f3 is misplaced, because yes, we double our f-pawns, but the point is that this knight's movement is heavily restricted by the existence of this f-pawn. So we may have doubled pawns, but the f6 pawn is actually a massive asset. Our opponent also wastes a move on h3, because if he doesn't, let's say he castles in this position, we play bishop g4, and it's actually really difficult to break this pin, especially because he doesn't have bishop to e2. And he can't bring another knight to d2 like you normally would in like an Italian position, for example. So, okay, h3. I think we can probably deliver a check on e8. This is a pretty standard setup of the pieces. In this opening, the Tartakower, I wouldn't say it's necessarily a setup-based opening, but it's definitely like certain positions that your pieces tend to take up. There's also an interesting idea of delivering a check on a5 and rotating our queen over to the king side before white has a chance to castle. It does exist, but we don't have to do it. Also, it is worth noting that g3 is a little bit compromised. For example, we could actually take this bishop right now. And after takes, we have bishop to g3 check, because it's no longer controlled by the h2 pawn, because it's been pushed to h3. So it's definitely a weakness to be aware of, but I'm not sure we can actually exploit it. We could consider the move bishop to f4, applying pressure to the white bishop. Of course, it can't take because it is pinned. If white castles, we can just win a pawn. And I actually don't see a problem with that. We lack development, sure, but this f6 pawn does a great job at locking up the f-file. So we're not really going to be threatened by all that much. So bishop to f4, I'd expect queen to d2 defending. I'm not sure if we can actually put any further pressure on, though. I think that it stops there. And white's going to castle next move if we don't do anything. I also don't really want to take, because it seems to just strengthen the white center. Worth noting, though. What else could we do? Well, we could consider the move queen to a5. Most likely queen d2 would be played. And yeah, we could go queen to h5. But white also has the option to queenside castle, so I'm not really sure I want to do that. We could go for more standard development with knight to d7. We also have to decide what we're going to do with this bishop. We could go bishop e6, challenging the white bishop, which I actually quite like the look of. I do quite like that, because this is a pretty strong bishop, and because h3 has been played, it's not clear. Like, I don't really want to put my bishop here, because I can't. And putting the bishop on f5, because the pawn is on d3 rather than d4, I'm kind of staring at nothing, so this seems like a good way to go about it. Okay, my opponent backs the bishop up. We could take. It would open the A file, giving my opponent's rook some scope. Don't necessarily want to do that. What else could we do? We could technically play bishop to f4. And if takes, we can take here with discovered check. But the bishop just retreats, and we retreat our bishop, and I don't see what we achieve there. It's just fancy for no reason. We could just go knight d7 and continue our development, which I'm leaning more towards. My opponent castles, and the game goes on. I think I'm just going to go for that. We are slightly more developed than our opponent, so that's certainly a good thing. My opponent also castles, so there's obviously no tactics on the E file anymore. By the way, if you're enjoying this video so far and you haven't already, I'd really appreciate it if you could drop a like and subscribe. Really helps the channel. We could consider the move a5, threatening a4, forcing the bishop to do something. And if my opponent goes a4 himself, we ruin his pawn structure because he can no longer take with the a pawn. However, it's a common thing in the Tartakower where pushing pawns on the queen side tends to be a bad idea for black. I actually had an over-the-board game maybe a month ago where I did go a5 and it came back to bite me horribly. Also, I think white just has c3, and I can no longer do this because he just takes. So it accomplishes basically nothing. We could consider the move f5, trying to play f4 and harass the bishop, but we don't achieve loads through that. We could use it as a rotation point for our knight to go to f6, which looks interesting. We could also play knight to e5, but that just seems to be offering trades for the sake of it. So I'm going to play the move f5. I like that. I like the look of f5. If take, I think we could actually take back with the f pawn. Maybe. Okay. Queen d2. Of course, that stops the move f4. But it doesn't do anything about knight to f6, of course. If knight to f6, take, does my opponent have knight d4? Forking the rook and the f5 pawn. I think I have rook e5, although there is f4, which is a little bit annoying. We could play the move knight to c5, harassing the bishop further. Yeah, there's still this knight d4 idea that I don't like. I could go bishop to c7, just a minor improving move. Again, I could take, but I don't really want to open up the a file for white. That just seems to help him get his pieces to better squares. I think I like the look of knight to f6. If bishop to g5, I think we can go h6. Taking shouldn't be a problem. We always have bishop to f8. An interesting position, though. And this is very typical of the Tartakower, where you'll get a position like this, and neither side really has any particular advantage. It's just a very even game. There's not loads of pawns in the center, which means that it's difficult to launch kingside attacks because the center is wide open for trades. So, you know, if I try to stack my pieces and, I don't know, take the knight and deliver mate, it takes way too long. And with the center open like this, my opponent can launch counterattacks very, very quickly. Whereas in a more closed center position, it's more difficult to do that. We could actually consider the move a5 now, though, because there is no... Well, you can go c3, but I can play a4 and you can't take it because the queen is no longer helping the bishop. So if the bishop retreats, I can play a move like bishop d5, and that looks pretty tempting, actually. I know I said it was a mistake to move my a-pawn, but here I think it makes a lot of sense. In chess, you do have to try to learn when to break the rules. Or principles, I should say. Opening middle game principles are there for a reason, because typically they are the correct or easiest improving thing to do. However, you also have to start to learn as you get better at chess when to break such principles. And here I think is one of those times. Okay, going after my bishop. I think we can play a4, though. Because if knight takes, pawn takes, the bishop's actually trapped. After bishop c4, I have b5. The bishop's completely trapped. If I go a4, he would have to take with the bishop. I take back with the pawn. There's no way for him to stop me playing e5, although currently my pawn is hanging, so I could maybe throw in the move queen to f6. I think I like the look of that. So let's play it. Yeah, no, the bishop's completely trapped. This game over, right? Well, pretty much. Yeah, he can throw that move in, but it doesn't do anything. I just go queen c7. I suppose a mistake would be queen to b6. And after bishop c4, I can't play b5. So that might be what he's playing for. But just queen c7 should be fine. And yeah, the bishop's just out of squares. Completely out of squares. It'll be very interesting to check the engine analysis after the game too, to see what the engine thinks of my a5, a4 idea, whether it agrees with me or not. Also, I'd like to see whether f takes e6 is a common idea in the Tartakower. The initial game review says no mistakes, no blunders, but a5 maybe is an inaccuracy? I don't know. Let's check the game analysis and see what it has to say. But yeah, definitely a very very solid game. Nothing major in it in terms of like no one made any massive mistakes right up until the end. The opening is interesting though, because we get a Tartakower, but we have the knight on f3. A normal Tartakower goes like this, and typically white kind of goes for a setup with the bishop on d3, the knight on e2, and the queen on c2. So let's say queen c2, h6, stopping bishop h7, knight e2, rook e8, castles. This is the typical setup. However, my opponent already commits the knight to f3. So we get a trade, bishop c4, bishop d6. d3 is an odd move. d4 is normally what is played. And then after castles, white has to be a little bit careful, because if white castles here, I obviously play the move bishop to g4, and it's like, how on earth is this knight ever going to move? After h3, I obviously back the knight up. The only way to bring the bishop back is probably to go d4 and admit you wasted time. Although the computer genuinely wants to move g4, which it will say is playable, but I mean practically is incredibly difficult. So, yeah, okay, we have this exchange, bishop c4, bishop d6, castles, h3, rook e8 check is the correct move, bishop to e3, and turns out bishop f4 was the correct move. Now, I could not figure out what to do after queen to d2. And the computer now changes its mind. Yeah, if you let the computer think, it actually changes its mind and decides that it's actually a complete waste of time to go bishop to f5. So I'm pretty happy I realized that, and hopefully the logic makes sense. Like playing bishop to f4, it looks pretty because it's like, oh, you can't take because of the pin, and like I'm threatening to win a pawn, but white just defends, and it's like, okay, and I've also got to be pretty careful here. I mean, queen e7, castles, I don't think I can go taking. If I take queen e3, rook e3, find the best move for white here. This is a really cool puzzle. Find the best move for white. Knight g5. Like, what a move. And you can't take because of rook f7, threatening discoveries against the king. So the only move is bishop to e6, interfering with the attack. Then white needs to find rook e7, bishop c4, rook takes e3, bishop f7, rook e7. And although black has two pieces for a rook, he struggles to develop. Like knight a6, for example, rook b7, rook b8. Well, you don't even take, you can just take here. And this is very difficult for black to hold on because he's just losing all his pawns. But okay, I choose to move bishop to e6. Sorry for going off on that massive tangent. I just thought it was very interesting. My opponent backs the bishop up, which confused me. Now, after bishop takes, yeah, okay, you can take with the f-pawn. You can. And then probably push like e5, f5, and take a big center, which is interesting. But my opponent backs the bishop up. And interestingly, the computer actually wants me to take, and then go bishop f4. And now if queen d2, it wants queen e7. And if castles, now it's apparently winning. Because there's not the pressure on f7 anymore. So that's very interesting. Alright then. Okay, well, bishop b3. I play the move knight d7, which is still completely fine. Like, as you can see, the game is completely equal. And that's typical of a lot of Tartakower positions. White castles. I go f5. Not the best move. Again, the computer likes taking, but there's no need to rush it. It also likes knight c5, which I did consider. But I only really took it seriously later on. I should have paid more attention to it in this position, because if all these traits happen, the computer says it's equal, probably because white has the 4-on-3 on the queen side. My 4-on-3 is way less impressive because I've got doubled f-pawns. However, this looks pretty nice for black, in my opinion, because we dominate the only open file. You know, a move like rook e1... What's wrong with queen e7? No, there's nothing wrong with that. And it's actually just, I don't know, a little bit difficult for white to fight back. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, it's an interesting position nonetheless. I chose f5, however, because I wanted to give the knight the f6 square. Black goes queen to d2. Computer likes h6, which I don't really understand. Knight to f8, also a common move for the knight. Potentially coming to g6. Oh, and then maybe you can try and go f4 that way. That's also interesting. There's not really a correct way to go about this position. I chose to move a5, which, you know, the computer doesn't love it, but it's not terrible. Here, I expected my opponent to take, and I was going to take back with the f-pawn and try and play the move e5. If my opponent goes d4, I have queen c7 threatening f4 to trap the bishop, so queen d3. Knight to f6. I can probably whack a knight on the e4 square, and we'll get a very interesting position, like rook fe1. I'm in no rush, to be fair. Although I can just whack the knight up. And it's just a game of chess, isn't it? I've got a weak e6 pawn, but I've got a strong outpost. I can probably make e5 happen at some point anyway. And we'll play chess. We'll play chess. That's one of the great things about the Tartakower, is you just get a game. An open center game, basically. My opponent, however, goes knight d4, and this is not a good move. I play the move a4, and I expected my opponent to take, of course. And after f takes e4, f4 is a move which looks very committal. But let's say the knight goes back to f3. What's the idea? Just e5, yeah? And black just has a massive center. Can maybe put the knight on f6. Can maybe execute e4 at the correct moment. Could even go c5 to dominate the d4 square. But I thought this looked very promising, which the computer agrees with. But my opponent takes on e6 with the knight, which I kind of saw coming. But after fe6, the bishop is completely stuck. He tries to attack my queen. As I said, a mistake would be queen to b6, because after bishop to c4, I do not have to move b5. Taking on b7 is not even good anyway, because I'm going to lose b7 in response. Although I have the intermezzo, queen to e5 threatening mate, giving me time. And if I do this, wow, my queen's getting trapped. Yeah, that's pretty funny. Although, can I escape? Oh, no, then I lose the e6 pawn. But yeah, after queen c7, white has nothing. If he moves his bishop, then b5, the bishop's trapped. That's game over. So, yeah, a very interesting game. I hope you guys learned a lot, not only from the game, but from the computer analysis. And I hope you enjoyed. If you want to see, oh my god, another interesting Caro Kann game, then check out the video up here. And if you want to see the previous episodes of the speedrun, check out the playlist down here. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in one of those videos.